When we think of empires that conquered the ancient world, we usually think of weapons, bronze spears, iron swords, or massive siege engines. But history is actually decided by something far more mundane: how far a soldier can march before his body collapses. In the rugged, high-altitude highlands of East Africa, the Kingdom of Aksum rose to become one of the four great superpowers of the ancient world, rivaling Rome and Persia. Their secret weapon wasn't a metallic alloy. It was a grain so tiny. Its name literally translates to lost, because if you drop a seed, you will never find it again. This is teff. Because teff grains are too small to be milled by stripping away the outer layers, you can only consume them whole. For an ancient army, this was a logistical lottery win. The FAO Food Database reveals that teff holds a staggering concentration of non-heme iron and calcium compared to standard grains. By eating the entire seed, husk and all, Aksumite warriors were essentially consuming a slow-burning, oxygen-pumping fuel. The high iron content boosted their red blood cells, allowing them to march through oxygen-thin mountain passes at 10,000 feet without suffering from altitude sickness or muscle fatigue. It was portable stamina, packing a massive punch. Geographically, teff is a masterpiece of adaptation. It thrives in the volatile soils of the Ethiopian plateau, resisting both severe droughts and waterlogged clays that would rot the roots of wheat or barley. For the Aksumite Empire, this resilience meant self-sufficiency. Their food supply couldn't be easily cut off by invading forces, and their granaries were always full. That ecological resilience eventually became a weapon of liberation. In 1896, the Italian army invaded Ethiopia. They brought advanced firearms and rigid European military doctrines, fully expecting an easy victory, but they completely miscalculated. They had absolutely no idea how mobile the Ethiopian forces really were. Fueled by a traditional fermented flatbread made from teff called injera, over 100,000 Ethiopian soldiers marched across brutal, vertical terrain with terrifying speed, completely outmaneuvering and routing the colonial forces, while the Italian soldiers were slowed down by heavy supply wagons filled with canned rations and wheat flour. The Ethiopian warriors carried light pouches of dried teff. They didn't just win a battle. They preserved their nation's independence, making Ethiopia one of the only African nations never colonized. And that physical legacy never left the soil. If you look at the Olympics today, elite long-distance runners from the Ethiopian highlands consistently dominate the podium. Their bodies were built on the exact same ancient, iron-rich grain that kept imperial armies marching centuries ago. Unlocking the full potential of this microscopic grain required a brilliant hack in pre-industrial food science. Wild fermentation. Raw teff contains high levels of phytic acid, an anti-nutrient that binds to minerals and prevents your body from absorbing them. To bypass this defense, ancient Ethiopians mixed ground teff flour with water and let it sit in clay vessels for 3 to 4 days. Wild yeasts and bacteria native to the grain's husk went to work, breaking down the phytic acid and pre-digesting the complex starches. The result of this chemical breakdown is a spongy, sour flatbread with a unique, aerated texture. For a soldier on the move, injera was the ultimate all-in-one ration. The fermentation process acted as a natural preservative, keeping the bread soft and edible for days without molding in the African heat. Furthermore, the sour lactic acid stimulated digestion and gut health, keeping camp diseases at bay by taking a grain almost too small to see, fermenting it to neutralize its chemical guards, and turning it into a light, portable fuel. Ancient humans solved the ultimate military riddle. They proved that true imperial power isn't measured by the size of your weapons, but by the efficiency of your calories. If you wanted to build an empire in the ancient world, you usually did it on flat ground. You needed rivers, valleys, and smooth plains to move your armies. But the Inca did the impossible. They built a sprawling civilization that stretched 4,000 miles across the jagged, oxygen-starved peaks of the Andes. And they did it without horses, without oxen, and without the wheel. Every single soldier, messenger, and supply moved entirely on foot. To feed a mountain army that could march 20 miles a day up vertical stone trails, you need a very specific kind of fuel. You need quinoa. Now, botanically speaking, quinoa isn't even a true grain. It is a pseudo-cereal, a seed from a relative of spinach and beets. But from a nutritional standpoint, it is a biological freak of nature, while staples like wheat and rice lack key amino acids, forcing human populations to hunt for meat or beans to balance their diet. FAO data reveals that quinoa is a complete protein. It naturally contains all 9 essential amino acids that the human body cannot synthesize on its own. For an Incan warrior, a small pouch of quinoa wasn't just starch. It was meat, milk, and bread combined into a single feather-light ration. The geography of the Andes is a nightmare for agriculture. At 13,000 feet, the air is thin, the sun scorches during the day, and frost freezes the soil at night. Corn refuses to grow here. But quinoa thrived. It evolved a rugged resilience, capable of surviving sub-zero temperatures and saline soils that would kill any other crop. The Inca capitalized on this by carving massive stone terraces into mountain faces, creating microclimates that turned hostile peaks into high-yield farms. Along their vast network of highways, they built state-run storehouses called calques. These structures were engineered with natural ventilation systems to keep the stored quinoa cool and dry, preserving the seeds for up to a decade. When an Inca army moved, they didn't carry heavy baggage trains. They simply tapped into these mountain vaults. But when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they realized they couldn't defeat the Inca just by fighting them. Francisco Pizarro noticed that quinoa was the literal and spiritual foundation of Incan resilience. The Inca called it the mother grain and used it in sacred religious ceremonies. To break the Incan spirit and starve out their armies, the Spanish launched a scorched earth campaign against the plant. They outlawed the cultivation of quinoa under penalty of death, forced farmers to grow European wheat instead, and trampled the vibrant fields. Quinoa was driven into near extinction, surviving only because indigenous farmers secretly cultivated it in the highest, most inaccessible valleys of the Altiplano, hidden from Spanish eyes. Like every survivor in the plant kingdom, quinoa didn't make it easy for predators. It wrapped its seeds in a chemical armor called saponins, a bitter, soapy compound that repels insects and birds. If you don't remove it, it tastes like toxic soap and irritates the stomach. The Inca solved this through physical labor. They vigorously rubbed the seeds in cold mountain streams, using the water to wash away the bitter foam until the grain was clean and sweet. Once washed, they would either boil it into a dense porridge or grind it into a portable flour, mixed with fat to create long-lasting energy balls for long-range scouts. It took nearly 500 years for the rest of the world to rediscover what the Inca knew all along. In the late 20th century, scientists looking for the ultimate food for long-duration space travel stumbled upon this forgotten Andean seed. NASA declared quinoa to be an almost unparalleled match for human nutritional needs, selecting it as a core crop for life support systems on future interstellar missions, from the vertical footpaths of the Andes to the crew cabins of spacecraft. This ancient mountain fuel proved that the ultimate secret to an empire's endurance isn't the weapons it wields, but the structural perfection of the calories it carries. To the elite of the Roman Empire, civilized life required wheat. If you didn't eat white wheat bread, you weren't fully human. When Roman legions marched north into the damp, sunless forests of Germany and Britain, they looked at the local tribes with absolute disdain. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder scoffed in his writings, noting that the Germanic barbarians were so primitive. They spent their days cooking porridge out of a common agricultural weed. That weed was oats. But the Romans missed the biological punchline. while wheat is a fragile king that demands Mediterranean sun and perfectly drained soils, oats are an evolutionary tank. Nutritionally, they hold a hidden advantage that wheat can never match. FAO databases show that oats have the highest lipid or fat content of any major cereal grain, up to 3 times higher than wheat. Even better, they are packed with beta-glucan, a unique soluble fiber that creates a thick gel in the digestive tract for a warrior in a freezing, wet climate. This gel slows down glucose absorption, providing a steady, hours-long release of energy. It acts like an internal, slow-burning furnace. The barbarians weren't starving. They were eating the ultimate cold weather endurance fuel. Geographically, oats rewrote the rules of where a civilization could survive. In the heavy clays of Scotland, Ireland, and Scandinavia, where relentless rain rots wheat roots and summer never gets hot enough to ripen corn, oats flourished. They didn't just tolerate acidic, waterlogged soil. They dominated it. Eventually, the Roman military machine realized it couldn't win wars on wheat alone. As Rome expanded, its heavy infantry became vulnerable to the swift, mounted cavalry of the northern tribes. To compete, Rome had to build its own massive auxiliary cavalry units. But a warhorse is a high-maintenance engine. It cannot survive on grass alone during a winter campaign, and wheat causes horses severe bloating. The Roman war machine had to adapt, systematically collecting thousands of tons of oats as a strategic military tax. The very weed they mocked became the logistical currency that kept Roman horses moving across the empire's frontiers. Centuries later, this cultural clash over a grain sparked one of the most famous insults in literary history. In 1755, the eccentric English scholar Samuel Johnson published his definitive dictionary. Being English, he couldn't resist a jab at his northern neighbors, famously defining oats as a grain, which in England is generally given to horses, but in Scotland supports the people. To which a Scottish counterpart famously fired back, "True. And where else will you find such horses and such men?" Turning this rugged seed into a stable military ration required solving a frustrating chemical puzzle. Because oats are so high in healthy fats, they carry a self-destruct mechanism. The moment an oat kernel is cracked open by a millstone, an active enzyme called lipase comes into contact with those fats, rapidly breaking them down into fatty acids. Within days, the flour turns incredibly bitter and rancid. Ancient northern cultures figured out a brilliant technological workaround: kiln, roasting. Before milling, they blasted the whole oats with dry heat over a fire. This served a dual purpose. It made the tough, papery hulls brittle enough to snap off easily, and it permanently deactivated the lipase enzyme. The roasted oats could then be ground into a stable, sweet, tasting oatmeal that lasted for months. Highland soldiers carried this powder in simple cloth pouches. On the march, they would mix a handful of oatmeal with cold stream water right in the palm of their hand, patting it into a dense, unleavened oatcake cooked quickly over a shield held above a fire. It required no bakeries, no supply wagons, and no complex logistics. By embracing a grain that the Mediterranean world rejected as a weed, the tribes of the north weaponized the climate, proving that the toughest empires are often built on the foods that can survive the storm. When we look back at the grand logistics of ancient warfare, we usually measure a grain's value by how much energy it provides. But imperial accountants looked at a completely different metric: decay. You can have the most nutritious crop on earth, but if it rots in a damp warehouse after 2 winters, you cannot sustain a superpower. Rice attracts weevils. Wheat easily succumbs to humidity and mold. But thousands of years ago, the architects of the first empires in East Asia wagered their entire military destiny on a modest, tiny bead of grain that chose to ignore the natural timeline of spoilage. This is millet. Botanically engineered for survival, millet is the ultimate cryptographic safe for calories. FAO databases highlight its exceptionally low baseline moisture content and a uniquely dense, tightly bound starch structure. It is a grain explicitly designed to hit pause on time. While other civilizations were forced to consume their harvests within a few seasons, the empires of the Central Plains discovered that millet could be buried underground and forgotten about, for decades remaining completely edible whenever an army needed to march. Geographically, millet was the only grain capable of turning the harsh, semi-arid yellow earth of northern China into a cradle of civilization. It requires a fraction of the water that rice demands, thriving in thin, unpredictable soils where sudden droughts would completely wipe out other crops. By cultivating this stubborn plant, early dynasties built an unshakable agricultural foundation right on the frontier. This ecological resilience allowed ancient Chinese empires to weaponize their food storage. Take the legendary Hanjie granary in Luoyang, the logistical heart of the Sui and Tang dynasties. This wasn't just a collection of barns. It was a massive subterranean military complex containing hundreds of deep, meticulously engineered silos capable of holding hundreds of thousands of tons of grain. The scale of this preservation is almost terrifying. When modern archaeologists excavated these underground vaults, they found silos still packed with ancient millet. The crazy part, in some of the sealed chambers, the millet retained its organic structure and faint yellow color. It had survived for over 1,300 years underground without rotting. This decades-long shelf life meant an emperor could accumulate massive strategic surpluses that were completely insulated from seasonal crop failures. It gave empires the logistical stamina to launch massive, multi-year military expeditions across the Gobi Desert, funding campaigns that redrew the map of Asia because their food supply simply refused to spoil. The secret to millet's immortality lies in its physical and chemical defenses. Its outer hull is highly silicated, forming a literal, glass-like armor that repels both boring insects and ambient humidity, because the interior kernel holds so little water. Fungal mold spores landing on the grain cannot find the moisture footprint they need to multiply. For a soldier on the move, this structural layout was a dream for field operations. Unlike wheat, which required complex, stationary brick ovens to bake into portable bread, millet was incredibly versatile. On the march, a soldier could pull a handful of dry roasted millet directly from his pouch for an immediate, crunchy survival snack. Alternatively, at the end of a long day's march, a squad could throw their collective rations into a single pot of boiling water. Within minutes, the tiny, dense seeds would rapidly gelatinize, expanding into a thick, highly digestible golden porridge that rehydrated tired bodies and delivered a steady release of complex carbohydrates. By mastering a grain that could defeat the natural cycle of decay, ancient humans unlocked the ultimate geopolitical cheat code. They proved that sometimes the secret to building an enduring empire isn't about moving faster than your enemy. It's about owning a grain that can outlast time itself in a dark underground vault.